With the Horde now on Azeroth via the Dark Portal, the First War was in full bloom. Villages were burned to the ground, and Stormwind was on the brink of destruction. If this is your first time visiting the channel, welcome. My name is Llane, and I'm in the middle of abridging the World of Warcraft Chronicle series. That means I'm taking the lore contained within the books and condensing it even more than it already is. I'm not getting into the finer details to each event, just sticking to what's written in the books. Currently, we're on Vol.2, but if you want to start from the beginning, then I suggest clicking the link in the tab up above or in the description down below. That will lead you to a video that contains all 10 episodes containing the lore in Volume 1. But if you're already caught up with the story, then let's continue our journey into the Tales of Azeroth. Following the conquest of Brightwood, Westfall, and the Red Ridge Mountains, Warchief Blackhand launched a massive offensive against Stormwind City, dismissing Gul'dan's failure at Blackrock Mountain as irrelevant to his inevitable victory. Thousands of Horde soldiers flooded Elwynn Forest, establishing siege lines that encircled the stronghold and cut off all land access. Blackhand commissioned Kilrogg Deadeye of the Bleeding Hollow clan and Cho'Gall of the Twilight's Hammer clan to lead the primary assault. After a night of heavy bombardment by siege engines, the Orcish clans charged the battlements at dawn, supported by warlocks who decimated the city's defenders with fellfire. By mid-morning, it appeared to Blackhand that the capital was on the verge of total collapse. However, the tide turned when Sir Anduin Lothar executed a daring naval maneuver, bypassing the Horde lines by sea to land a contingent of Stormwind's knights in the Horde's rear. This surprise charge through Elwynn Forest shattered the Orcish rearguard, creating a massive opening in their lines. As the Bleeding Hollow and Twilight's Hammer clans scrambled to pivot and defend themselves, the massive gates of Stormwind opened, allowing the city's soldiers to pour out in a coordinated counterattack. This hammer and anvil strategy crushed the Horde's momentum, forcing a chaotic retreat in what became their most significant disaster to date. Though a furious Blackhand considered executing Kilrogg and Cho'Gall for the defeat, he ultimately spared them to avoid a clan revolt, withdrawing the remaining Horde forces to Red Ridge to regroup. The victory of Stormwind City was not a stroke of luck, as King Llane and Sir Anduin Lothar had been acting on critical intelligence provided by Khadgar, who had gathered the information from Garona. Although Gul'dan was fully aware that Garona was leaking Horde battle plans and cultural details to the humans, he allowed her to remain at Karazhan because the information she brought back regarding Medivh was far too valuable to lose. During their time together at the tower, Khadgar and Garona grew increasingly disturbed by the state of Karazhan, which had become infested with tormented spirits and horrific visions. They noticed a chilling change in Medivh himself. His previous volatile mood swings had been replaced by a total lack of emotion, as if he had completely retreated from his own humanity, causing the very fabric of reality within the tower to unravel. Desperate for answers, Khadgar scoured the libraries of Karazhan and discovered an obscure tome detailing an ancient technique to evoke specific memories through visions. While the spell was initially unreliable and failed to provide direct answers about Medivh's condition, Khadgar eventually shifted his focus to witnessing the true origin of the rift between Azeroth and the Orcish homeworld of Draenor. This attempt was hauntingly successful, as both Khadgar and Garona watched a vision of a hooded stranger confronting Gul'dan and the Shadow Council to orchestrate the creation of the Dark Portal. To their utter horror, the vision revealed the face of the mysterious stranger to be Medivh, proving that the Guardian of Tirisfal himself was the architect responsible for unleashing the Horde upon the world. Scarcely had the troubling vision faded when Medivh became aware of what Khadgar and Garona had discovered, forcing the pair to narrowly escape the Guardian's wrath. They fled to Stormwind City to warn King Llane and Lothar of the treason. During their meeting, Gul'dan attempted to mentally compel Garona to murder the king, an urge she resisted without realizing its source. While Llane struggled to believe his friend's betrayal, Lothar trusted Khadgar's word and recognized Medivh as a threat greater than the Horde. Lothar charged Gavinrad with the city's defense and led a war party, including Khadgar and Garona, to Karazhan to capture or kill his childhood friend. Panicked by the impending assault, Gul'dan reached out to Medivh's mind to find the location of the Tomb of Sargeras before the Guardian could be killed. As the battle at Karazhan commenced, Sargeras assumed full control of Medivh's body and unleashed devastating magic. During the chaotic fray of fire and steel, Sargeras attempted to seize Gul'dan's mental chains on Garona, leaving her so confused she could no longer distinguish friend from foe. Khadgar was nearly killed when Sargeras attempted to rip out his soul. Though the spell failed, it drained the apprentice's life force, prematurely aging him into a wizened old man. Ultimately, Khadgar delivered the final blow by burying a blade in his mentor's chest, an act that banished the spirit of Sargeras into the depths of the twisting nether. In his final moments, Medivh's mind cleared, and he was struck by the horrific weight of the deaths he had caused. He expressed only gratitude to Khadgar, Lothar, and their companions for thwarting the Dark Titan's plans before he drew his last breath. Garona, however, was not there to witness his end, having already fled the tower to an unknown location during the magical struggle. The death of the possessed Guardian triggered a violent explosion of fel energy from Karazhan, which blighted the surrounding lands and transformed Brightwood into the haunted region known as Duskwood. The event also devastated the Horde's leadership. Gul'dan had been deep within Medivh's memories when the Guardian died, and the resulting psychic shock threw the warlock into a profound coma. Despite this, the intrusion was not entirely in vain, as Gul'dan had successfully gleaned the location of the Tomb of Sargeras and knowledge of various ancient relics of power scattered across Azeroth. Far from the events of Karazhan, Gul'dan's sudden coma threw the Shadow Council into a state of total disarray, leaving them confused and leaderless. While Warchief Blackhand was equally puzzled by the warlock's condition, he was not entirely displeased, as he had grew weary of the Shadow Council's attempt to subvert his authority. However, Orgrim Doomhammer recognized this chaos as the perfect opportunity to strike. Believing that the Horde had been damned by corruption and reeling from the failed Siege of Stormwind, Orgrim decided to challenge Blackhand to a mock Gorah, a traditional duel to the death. He publicly denounced Blackhand as a traitor who had sold the Orcish people into servitude to dark, demonic forces. The challenge was one Blackhand could not refuse without losing the respect of the entire Horde, and without the Shadow Council's assassins to do his dirty work, he was forced to fight. Painted in clan symbols and slick with oil, the two orcs engaged in a brutal duel that lasted for hours. The contest finally ended when Orgrim used his family's legendary weapon, the Doomhammer, to crush Blackhand's skull. Following his victory, the gathered orcs knelt before Orgrim, proclaiming him the new Warchief. Orgrim immediately addressed the Horde, blaming the warlock's fell powers for the death of Draenor and outlawing the practice of such magic on pain of death to ensure Azeroth would not suffer the same fate. Despite his desire for complete vengeance, Orgrim's pursuit of the Shadow Council was delayed as the members had already fled to unknown locations. He turned his full attention back to the war with Stormwind, realizing that while he did not relish further bloodshed, the orcs had no other choice for survival. Returning to the dying world of Draenor was not an option, meaning the conquest of Stormwind was the only way to secure a new home for his people. Warchief Doomhammer ordered the clans to prepare for a final, decisive assault, and the Horde began its march toward the human capital before the sun had even set. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that if you're enjoying this episode, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. And if you ever feel like supporting the work that I do here, you can check out my membership options here on YouTube or over on Patreon. I really do appreciate the support from everyone who has already done so. I'm not really in a position to offer much in return, but what I do offer is early access to the videos when I publish them. But now, having said that, let's get back to our story. Warchief Orgrim Doomhammer was determined not to repeat the failures of the previous siege, so he unleashed the full might of the Horde against Stormwind City. Although he briefly considered summoning reinforcements like the Warsong and Shattered Hand clans from Draenor, he realized that every passing day allowed the humans to regroup, making an immediate, overwhelming strike a necessity. As the final battle commenced, the Horde successfully breached the city's walls and surged into the streets. Despite the ferocity of the Orcish assault, the defenders of Stormwind managed to hold their ground in desperate urban combat, keeping the invaders at bay for a time. While the battle raged, King Llane met with his commanders in the keep, anxious for news regarding the fate of Lothar and Khadgar. When word arrived that Garona had returned from Karazhan, the king immediately granted her an audience, eager to learn what had transpired with Medivh. However, the psychic trauma Garona suffered during the battle at the tower had fractured her mind. Though she had previously resisted Gul'dan's compulsion to kill the king, the blurring of her thoughts and the lingering weight of the warlock's command finally shattered her willpower. In a tragic moment of mental collapse, Garona succumbed to the old command despite her deep respect for the king, who had shown her kindness. With tears streaming down her face, she plunged a dagger into King Llane's heart, an act witnessed by his young son, Varian. This brutal assassination would forever scar the young prince, cementing a lifelong perception of the orcs as a deceitful and murderous race. In the ensuing chaos, Garona fled the keep and vanished into the fires of the city, while the news of the king's death spread rapidly, causing the morale of the defenders to crumble. Lothar and Khadgar arrived back from Karazhan to find their home in ruins and their king dead. Realizing the city was lost, Lothar took command of the remaining forces and focused entirely on a desperate evacuation. Alongside Khadgar and Gavinrad, they fought street by street to reach the harbor, gathering Prince Varian, Queen Taria, and as many civilians as possible. The retreat was costly. Many were lost to the flames and the orcs, including Queen Taria. Upon reaching the docks, the survivors boarded the remaining ships and destroyed the rest of the fleet to prevent the Horde from pursuing them across the sea. As the refugees sailed away, they watched from the water as Stormwind City was razed to the ground, marking the end of the First War. The Horde stood as the undisputed victors of the conflict, having finally claimed the stronghold they had sought for so long. However, despite achieving this monumental conquest and securing a new home for his people, Warchief Orgrim Doomhammer found no joy in the victory. The cost of the war and the internal rot of the Horde left the new leader far from satisfied with the state of his nation. Following the destruction of Stormwind, Warchief Orgrim Doomhammer chose not to pursue the human refugees, focusing instead on securing his new territory and consolidating control. He sent messengers to Draenor to summon the remaining clans, including the Warsong and Shattered Hand, though he soon received discouraging news that these clans had devolved into infighting and bloodlust. Orgrim's primary internal mission was the total eradication of the Shadow Council, whom he blamed for the corruption of the Orcish race and the death of his friend, Durotan. To locate them, he captured and tortured Garona until she revealed their secret refuge within the smoldering heights of Blackrock Spire. The Horde launched a brutal assault on the mountain, where the elemental lord Ragnaros and the old gods chose to remain hidden, curiously observing the violence. The warlocks of the Shadow Council were no match for Orgrim's loyalists and were largely slaughtered. One of the few to survive was the two-headed ogre Cho'Gall, who successfully pleaded for his life by arguing that his leadership was the only thing keeping the Twilight's Hammer clan from total madness. Reluctantly, Orgrim spared him, realizing he needed the fighting force and Cho'Gall's ability to establish a rapport with the Dark Iron Dwarves living deep within the volcano. Under the secret influence of Ragnaros, the Dark Iron Dwarves agreed to allow the Horde to use Blackrock Spire as their new headquarters, a move that delighted the old gods, who anticipated future chaos. Orgrim also chose to spare Garona. Despite her forced betrayal of King Llane, the Warchief recognized that Gul'dan had been exceptionally cruel to her, and that the assassination had ultimately aided the Horde's victory. He placed her under the supervision of his trusted lieutenant, Eatridge, to ensure her continued fealty. This established a new power structure within the mountain, purging the old warlock leadership while retaining key assets for the battles ahead. As the smoke cleared from the purge of the warlocks, Orgrim faced a reality that reinforcements from Draenor would be limited to only a few disciplined soldiers and ogres. However, the Warchief's focus began to shift toward a new prospect of strength that far exceeded mere numbers. He became aware of a potential weapon rooted in Azeroth's ancient history, a source of power that promised to change the course of the coming conflicts. With Blackrock Spire secured as a formidable base of operations, the Horde prepared to face whatever new enemies might emerge from the north. Throughout the First War, Azeroth's dragons were notably absent due to a 10,000-year-old betrayal. During the War of the Ancients, the dragon aspects, Alexstrasza, Nozdormu, Ysera, and Malygos, infused their essence into the dragon soul to fight the Burning Legion. However, the fifth aspect, Neltharion, refused to empower it and instead used the artifact to turn against his allies. This treachery earned him the name Deathwing and shattered dragonkind. The remaining aspects eventually reclaimed the artifact, but, unable to destroy it, hid it in the Redridge Mountains with enchantments preventing any dragon from touching it. Millennia of isolation followed. Nozdormu retreated into the Timeways, Ysera into the Emerald Dream, and a maddened Malygos into his lair, while the Red Dragonflight hunted Deathwing's children nearly to extinction. Deathwing himself entered a deep slumber to recover from the artifact's backfire, which had nearly torn his body apart. The massive magical surge from the opening of the Dark Portal finally roused him. He saw the Horde as a perfect tool to eliminate the mortal races and distract the other aspects, allowing him to restore the Black Dragonflight to glory. Deathwing began a campaign of subtle manipulation to ensure the Horde's success. In the guise of a human noble, he charmed the aristocracy of Lordaeron, using gossip and sorcery to convince them that reports of the Orcish invasion were mere rebel fabrications. Later, he infiltrated the Horde itself as a Blackrock Orc, gaining the trust of Gul'dan, Blackhand, and Orgrim Doomhammer. He recognized that while the Shadow Council served the Legion, their downfall under Orgrim actually made the Orcs more susceptible to the influence of his own masters, the Old Gods. Despite the Horde's victory in the First War, Deathwing knew they were too weak to face a united human front or the other dragon aspects. He realized the Dragon Soul was the key. While no dragon could touch it, the Orcs could wield it to control or destroy his siblings. He began sending intoxicating visions to Zuluhed, leader of the Dragonmaw clan, depicting the Orcs taming and riding dragons, as they once had Rylax on Draenor. This manipulation successfully goaded the clan into seeking out the ancient weapon. Guided by Deathwing's influence, Zuluhed led the Dragonmaw to the Redridge Mountains to claim the featureless gold disc. After a brutal skirmish that cost over a dozen Orcish lives, they managed to kill the artifact's guardian, the Red Dragon Oristraz. Zuluhed's primary warlock, Necros Skullcrusher, recovered the relic. Sensing faint demonic energies left over from the War of the Ancients, Necros renamed the artifact the Demon Soul. unknowingly falling right into Deathwing's trap. The breach of the artifact's ancient wards did not go unnoticed. Far to the north, Alexstrasza sensed the disturbance and grew deeply concerned when she received no word from Oristraz. Believing a mortal had foolishly stolen the artifact and that her guardians simply needed assistance in retrieving it, she gathered several of her red dragons and flew south. She remained unaware that she was flying directly into an ambush orchestrated by her traitorous brother. This period also highlighted the tragic state of the Blue Dragon flight, which had been nearly wiped out during Deathwing's original betrayal. Had it not been for Alexstrasza's flight, saving and hatching the remaining Blue Dragon eggs, the lineage would have gone extinct. Because the Blue Dragons were too few and Malygos too insane to fulfill their duties, the Red Dragon flight had taken over the task of safeguarding Azeroth's magical artifacts and places of power, a responsibility that now placed them directly in the path of the Horde's new weapon. The destruction of Stormwind sent shockwaves through the northern kingdoms, deeply affecting King Tyrannus Menethil II of Lordaeron, who had previously struggled to distinguish fact from the rumors spread by Deathwing. Upon the arrival of the refugees, Sir Anduin Lothar provided a first-hand account of the Horde's devastating power and warned Tyrannus that the human nations would be systematically destroyed if they did not unite. In response, a historic gathering known as the Council of Seven Nations was convened in Lordaeron's capital city. This assembly brought together influential leaders, including King Llane Wrynn of Gilneas, Lord Admiral Dalen Proudmoore of Kultiras, Archmage Antonidas of Dalaran, King Thoris Trollbane of Stromgarde, and King Aiden Perinold of Alterac, to discuss an unprecedented threat facing their world. Despite the gravity of the situation, the council was initially fractured by doubt and political hesitation. While Archmage Antonidas and Lord Admiral Proudmoore supported the formation of a unified alliance based on Khadgar's reports and personal ties to Lothar, other leaders remained skeptical. King Greymane and King Perinold openly questioned the existence of an otherworldly invasion, their minds still clouded by the subtle manipulations and misinformation previously sown by Deathwing. As the kings debated the necessity of a pact and the legitimacy of the Orcish threat, the council's progress remained stalled, leaving the northern kingdoms vulnerable as the Horde finalized its preparations for a massive, renewed offensive.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing, please check out my YouTube, Patreon, or Twitch memberships. And a big shout out to all the names on the screen here. You mean so much to me. Thank you so much for your help. And with that, I'll see you guys next time on the Tales of Azeroth.